Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube. With the voice, Milt Thompson. Delivering the best of sports programming. Interviews with top celebrities. And the answer to the question, where are they now? And now, Milt Thompson, Playing for Keeps.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Playing for Keeps. I am your host, the voice, Milt Thompson. I know you've been listening to the promos and getting geared up for the next year of shows. Fantastic shows talking about some of the Horatio Alger stories that are out there, talking about some of this rags to riches and riches back to rags and maybe rags back to riches again. Once a month, we're going to have a Where Are They Now feature. And, we're going to look forward to having you here every Friday evening. And it's going to be right before Mr. Eisenberger does a basketball show and right before the game of the week for basketball and then football and then basketball again. So we're looking forward to having you aboard. Now, on this show today, in our inaugural show, in our run-up to all the great things, we're going to have one of the most foremost sports institutions, not just here in Indy, but really in the country. And that's going to be our friend Ryan Vaughn, who is the president of Indiana Sports Corporation. And he's got an interesting history, what brought him to the world of sports, but he understands the world of sports and business and what that confluence means. So that's what we're going to do on Playing for Keeps. Ryan, I'm going to welcome to the show now. And when we take our short break, we're going to come back and get right on into finding a little bit more about what you've been doing in the world of sports.
Well, always grateful to have a conversation with you. Looking forward to it.
Looking forward.
Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube. Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube.
Welcome back to Playing for Keeps. I am your host, the voice, Milt Thompson. We're here in our studios here at WHMB Channel 40, and we're here with the irrepressible one, Ryan Vaughn, the president of Indiana Sports Corporation. Welcome to our show.
Well, Milt, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on the show, and as always, I look forward to our conversations.
Well, you've got a rich history in our community. Give me a little bit about your educational background and then what you did in the world of politics, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I'm a native, so I'm born and raised in Indy, went to Ben Davis High School, Wabash College, and then law school downtown. My original passion was to become a trial lawyer. I wanted to walk into the courtroom and pound on tables and yell at jurors. And so I actually started as a prosecutor. I spent the first 4 years of my life as a deputy prosecutor hired by Scott Newman. I worked most of my time for Carl Brizzi. Loved that job, but after about 4 years, it felt like it was time to migrate into private practice. So I did so, went to a small firm in litigation, but found out pretty quickly that I missed the emotional reward of public service and was trying to find a way to get back in. And that's kind of how I got involved in politics. Started volunteering on campaigns, and then, of course, eventually ran for office.
Well, what office did you run for, and which one did you win, and then what that led to?
Yeah, I ran for City County Council. I was what was then District 3, so the Broad Ripple area was sort of if you were to drop a pin in the middle of the district, that's why I ran. I ran in a caucus. I like to say it was unanimous, but no one else ran against me. So my first election was a pretty smooth one. I really enjoyed serving as a city council. I was familiar with the public safety issues from the city side, from a prosecutor side, but once I served on the council, I really got exposed to a lot of other issues that were interesting to me: transportation, poverty, infrastructure, all of those things. When I started, I was the youngest, newest member of the minority. And a year later, after an election cycle, found myself one of the most senior members of the new majority. So it was quite a whirlwind early political career for me. Ended up serving as president of the council for a couple of years. And then eventually left the practice of law and that office to serve as Mayor Ballard's chief of staff.
Right. You and I had very similar beginnings as I was at the Marion County Prosecutor's Office under then Prosecutor Goldsmith, and then matriculated onto some smaller law firms and started some businesses. So we've got that in the background. So we've always had that litigation spirit. Let's, like you say, pound the court. Enough of trying cases, right?
That's right.
What we're going to litigate is the world of sports. Tell us a little bit about Indiana Sports Corporation, its history, and why it is such a vital piece of our economic development here in the city of Indianapolis.
Yeah, thank you. I feel actually a little silly telling you about Sports Corp history. We should reverse roles here a little bit, and you could tell me since you were really there and a key leader from the beginning. But the purpose of the Indiana Sports Corp is to advance and inspire our community through sports. We were really founded in 1979 to address an economic challenge that most major cities across the country were experiencing. Kind of massive suburban flight, loss of business, loss of residential density downtown. And one of the strategies that was deployed back then was to see if we couldn't become the amateur sports capital of the world. Almost simultaneously to our founding, Congress passed the Amateur Sports Act. The Amateur Sports Act created a lot of national governing bodies, and the goal of the organization back then was kind of twofold. One, we wanted to attract those national governing bodies, which you may now know as USA fill in the blank, gymnastics, track and field, football. Have them locate in Indianapolis, have them choose Indianapolis as the place where they were going to locate. And then simultaneously, as we were helping them build their business, let's go after their championships and see if we can use a sports tourism moment to really drive economic activity and brand building for the city. It was really a tremendous success from the get-go, a lot of political support from both sides of the aisle, and certainly great civic and community leadership as well.
Yeah, well, precisely that Amateur Sports Act kind of broke up the old AAU, the Amateur Sports Union, so that you had these Class A sports now that had to be their own individual businesses, and so they became Class A sports under the Olympic guise.
Right.
And from that, Sports Corp kind of did the sports festival, and then major underachievement with the Pan American Games, and then on and on and on until there's this major opportunity for a Super Bowl.
Right.
And you were steering the wheel there. Tell us about how all that came about.
Well, so we hosted the Super Bowl in 2012. I was actually still with the city at that time. I was serving as president of the council, but it had been a vision of both a prior mayor who had pursued a Super Bowl opportunity and Mayor Ballard at the time to really go after this crowning achievement. You know, we had a brand new state-of-the-art facility in Lucas Oil Stadium. To your point, we had at that time this 30-year history of hosting really the world's premier championship events. We had a great reputation nationally. The Pan Am Games was cataclysmic in helping develop a huge volunteer base and a lot of civic buy-in. We were really poised to sort of get to the top of that premier event mountain, and with the help and the leadership of folks like Mark Miles and Allison Millington, successful in winning the bid. But then, as you know, as soon as you win the bid, you kind of go, "Oh no, now we got to do it.
We got to do it. Make this work." Right.
And it was pretty much a 4-year planning process to get there, and great leadership with Mark and Allison and Susan Boffman and many others getting it done. And it really was sort of the top of the mountain, if you will, when it comes to premier sporting events in North America.
Well, your political background and your ability to be able to work between various factions, and you got venues owned by various folks. I mean, the university owns some, state owns some, city owns some, Parks Department, all those things. How do you get everyone in a room and work together to make these things happen?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, in many ways, when I started at the Sports Corp back in 2014, I had no real background in sports business. All of my professional background was really sort of in law and in politics. But what that really is community building, right? And the reason the Sports Corp was such an attractive opportunity for me is that I come to learn how important its mission was, viewing it through my other service lenses. And so to be able to step over to Sports Corp and recognize that this organization had built a 30-plus year history of doing exactly what you're talking about, being the convener, right? The Indiana Sports Corp doesn't own a team. We don't own a league. We don't own a venue. What we own are the community relationships and the history to be able to pull these things together. And so it's difficult at times, and sometimes it feels like pulling all these people together may be a little unnecessary. But the reality is all the events are so much better when we're all working together and on the same page. And so it's a lot of fun.
Isn't how we do that, though, in Indianapolis? Isn't that our DNA? I mean, Sports Corporation with this rich history, but you don't do very much without the Capital Improvement Board, and you don't do very much without the Visit Indy, and you don't do much without Downtown Indy, and the hotel operators and private business. Lots of things that kind of gyrate. and then all of a sudden the pandemic kind of wipes stuff off the map, right? And that led our NCAA in town, and as you say, other governing bodies in town, for us to even think about this being a basketball community. We're going to undertake March Madness in one city with help from a few towns away. We're going to take a break shortly, but I want you to start the story now, Ryan, about what led up to that, and then we're going to talk about how that was achieved.
Well, of course, the NCAA is one of those organizations that we've talked about that relocated to Indianapolis, and our partnership with their championships has been tremendous, and particularly the men's and women's Final Fours. We know how important that event is to the NCAA, how devastating it was not to have had that in the previous year. And so, we had already been awarded the 21 Final Four, but we got a sense very early on that they might be thinking about hosting the entire tournament in one location. And so we started a planning process really in the summer on our own to figure out how we could possibly do that with all the challenges that the pandemic faces. And thankfully it was successful.
Well, thankfully it was successful because, there, as you'd mentioned, the DNA that we created with a group of volunteers that really is our secret sauce.
Absolutely.
Goes way beyond what other people in other cities do. They emulate, but they can't replicate.
No, yeah. I mean, my peers across the country and Vince Wright holders that travel the country will tell you that it is our most distinguishing feature. Our people are Hoosier hospitality, which is a real thing that comes from real people that show up and bring great personalities and knowledge and passion for their city, really separate us from the competition.
Really developed a cottage industry of experts around sports business and sports. And that's the amazing thing about our folks right here in Indy. And we're playing for keeps. We're playing for all the goods. And with Ryan Vaughn, we'll be right back after these words.
Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube. Playing for Keeps, presented by Jiffy Lube.
Welcome back to Playing for Keeps. I am your host, The Voice, Milt Thompson, here on WHMB Channel 40, and we're delighted to have in our first show Ryan Vaughn, president of Indiana Sports Corporation, and he was giving us a little bit of history about his own spectacular career leading up to his current spectacular opportunities and helping run the sports engine of our city. Ryan, we were talking about the NCAA and just biting off a bigger apple than anyone's ever bitten before. And when I recalled the words from Mark Emmert saying, failure is not an option. How can you do something like that? Tell us the scope and the size and what had to go into the planning for this.
Yeah, well, it was a tremendous opportunity, and first, all credit to the NCAA for trusting our community with that opportunity. We heard from the NCAA really around Thanksgiving of the prior year that they were seriously interested in hosting the entire tournament at one site, but there was a lot of work that needed to be done. Primarily, a lot of collaboration that needed to be done between the NCAA, the Marion County Health Department, State Health Department, and their team at IU Health, which was also tremendous in making this happen. So really, for the month of December, I think we scheduled and canceled the press conference announcing it 5 times, including on New Year's Day once. So there was a lot of work that needed to be done. But once we finally figured out that the safety protocols were in place, we knew that we could accomplish it. For the same things we were talking about in the first segment, this community works together in ways that is unique and doesn't occur in other cities. And so on very short order, literally less than 24 hours, we were able to organize a press conference with the governor and the mayor and President Emmert, myself, and a couple others to announce it. And then we went about the business of, trying to plan 68 basketball games in a 70-day period of time. And people forget sometimes, too, that we also hosted the Big Ten men's tournament, the Big Ten women's tournament, and the Horizon League tournament leading right into it. So it was nearly 100 basketball games that took place in a 70-day period.
Well, health protocols are a kind of a long shot during that period of time, and but my goodness, the logistics of transportation, internal transportation, folks not being able to leave their hotel rooms or their lobbies, or they're being quarantined away, and the risk of the risk of some team coming down with infection in a significant way, or even the entire tournament. And then you had television that you had to do that for, and whatever crowds you had to have some protocols there. Who's in charge of everything?
Well, primarily the NCAA, but when it comes to most of those operations and logistics you mentioned, they were run by, our incredible team at Indiana Sports Corp and great volunteers. Really the first 10 days of the tournament were the most stressful. And when I say the tournament, I mean the 10 days where the teams arrive, they have an opportunity to quarantine, then start practicing, and then you kind of go into that first weekend of games. It was interesting. I mean, once you're in the bubble or the controlled environment, you weren't leaving. So if you showed up and you forgot your toothbrush, we had to figure out a way to get you a toothbrush, and that usually involves someone going out and buying it for you and having it delivered, and all kinds of little things like that had to take place. You mentioned transportation, and we had more than 650 different police escorts during that 3-week period to 7 different venues, multiple practice sites. And I think one of the things that's probably gotten a lot of attention is the logistics of how do you do the laundry of all these people, especially during that first 10-day period when all the teams are there and they haven't gone home. So that was a real challenge, and we had literally volunteer CEOs and presidents of companies that were pulling third shift laundry duty on the outside trailer of the convention center just to make sure that these kids had clean practice uniforms in the morning. And so it's that kind of tremendous spirit and community that we have that made it possible.
Well, we always have people step up because no matter what you do in planning, you can't take care of the unanticipated stuff.
Right.
I remember Michael Browning when all of a sudden the credential list for the Pan American Games wasn't there. Well, Michael Browning pulls out his own credit card, and says, we're not worried about that. We're getting all these people into the country. Yeah. Just like CEOs saying, give me that laundry bag.
Right.
Let's go. Because we cannot fail.
Yeah, failure was not an option. Absolutely.
Failure was not an option. So ultimately, people said, you got it done. They raised a flag and they sang the song and the confetti came down and with limited crowds. So what was the economic impact when you can't really fill up these places on the NCAA as well as upon the city?
Yeah, traditionally a Final Four in itself, not the entire tournament, but just the Final Four would have an economic impact of around 100 to 150 million for our city. But that's, again, full crowds, multiple days. Here, venue capacities were limited based on the size of the venue, but nobody had more than 2,500 fans. And it was a challenge to figure out how that impact was going to play out. But at the end of the day, we're still studying it, but we think the economic impact will still be north of $50 million, which, at the time, there was nothing happening downtown. Most of the office buildings, people had not returned to work. Restaurants were hanging by a shoestring. And so just to bring that kind of activity, and I can't leave this out, all of those artists that we were able to activate, working with the Arts Council and the great job they did to execute the SWISH program, it just really brought the city back to life. The boards off the windows, the art up, the music on the streets, the people walking around. It was just a tremendous emotional lift for the city, along with a financial lift.
Well, sports and even the business of sports, but you can separate out that this has been an awakening from a social justice point of view, to the degree to which sports allows us to regalvanize ourselves. Give us your views and thoughts about that as we look into our future.
Yeah, no, I think it's critically important. In fact, hanging framed in my office from literally my second week, 7.5 years ago, or 6.5 years ago, is a quote from Nelson Mandela that speaks exactly to this, that sports has the power to bring the community together and to overcome our racial divides. And so I've always seen sport as a mechanism for community building, and I think we saw that on display once we got back to sports. Whether it was the athletes themselves, the presidents of universities, or the leaders of the teams or coaches, all being very deliberate about highlighting, all that we had suffered together as a community through the pandemic, and then of course the unrest around the racial injustice which was taking place. And so In a very deliberate and thoughtful way, I'll refer to Swish again. When we wanted to do community programs like we've been doing for 40 years, we were really going to be thoughtful about making sure that we were creating spaces that were open to everyone and welcoming to everyone. And so, more than half of the Swish artists that were activated were women or people of color. We had, dancing in different languages. We had art from all types of different folks. And having been a part of we call them ancillary events, for our events for 7 years, and having been a fan before that, this was by far, I think, the most diverse and welcoming activity we've ever put on.
Well, Ryan, we are, I was invited to come downtown and be interviewed for a video that Sports Corp's going to put on. So put on your long-range visions there in a couple of minutes and tell us about where Sports Corp is today and where you hope for it to be in the near future.
Yeah, well, and thank you for participating. We're actually, thanks to a generous gift from our prior board chair, we're creating this documentary about the history of Indiana Sports Corp, but also largely focused on the events of March Madness and the Final Four, and very excited to unveil that at the end of February. And you're very kind to give your time, and you'll certainly be invited to attend, as will many others, so I look forward to that. Sports Corp today is really in a good spot. We've got really strong partnerships with the NCAA, the Big Ten. We've got a nice pipeline of events. We've got the Big Ten Football Championship coming up here in December, College Football National Championship after that. And then, of course, we've got the NBA All-Star Game relocated from 21 to 24, and many, many other events on the horizon. I think one of the most exciting things about where we are is we're in a position where we've solidified those relationships, built on what I would call traditional sports, but we're now being really thoughtful about strategies beyond the game themselves. How can sports have its broadest possible impact, right? So we're working, and with our partners, we've launched a sports business tech initiative. Techstars Sports Accelerator has been in existence for 2 years, which is really exciting. We're partnering with IEDC on a new initiative called Sports HQ, which will attract sports-related businesses in the tech space to choose Indianapolis as a place where they want to locate. And then we're really excited about the opportunities present themselves in esports. This is, I hate to even call it emerging. It's huge now, but it's just making its way into the mainstream. And, we just completed our second year of the Esports Combine, which is a really cool event which pairs high school students doing a combine, think NFL Combine, doing a skills demonstration in front of college recruiters. And those college recruiters can then offer scholarships to players of a certain quality or interest. And so it's been very, very successful and exciting about the growth in that space as well.
Well, the gross national product of esports now outdoes even soccer around the world. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Well, you've not only had a fascinating career, you have unbelievable great vision about where we're headed in the future. And one thing I've discovered from my long time service in that world of sports business around our town and country and world is that our mantra is the same. No matter who it is that's talking about it, no matter from what direction they come, when we get to the message is we are, we can do, and we shall do. I want to thank Ryan Vaughn, our very first guest on Playing for Keeps, and I want to thank you for listening in. And you'll continue to listen in, and you'll join all of our wonderful sponsors and presenters and make a whole lot of sense out of the sports world on Playing for Keeps. I am your host, the voice Milt Thompson, and we'll see you right back here next week.